this way. There we go. Okay, so you all have chosen The Alchemist, which, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, really took me by surprise. But I'm excited to start this book with you, actually. I've never read it. It's been on my list forever. It's a classic. And this is like the 25th anniversary edition. So yeah, look at us reading classics. We started with A Christmas Carol. We read The Outsiders, The Giver, which is like a modern classic. And here we go, another modern classic. There's an introduction by the author, which I am going to read because it offers up a little explanation as to why he wrote this book, and it also might help you with today's classwork. There was a question about, what experiences in his life, did he bring to the table as a writer, and maybe why he wrote The Alchemist. So maybe you hear something today that you include in your response. Okay, the introduction. I remember receiving a letter from the American publisher HarperCollins that said, reading The Alchemist was like getting up at dawn and seeing the sun rise while the rest of the world slept. I went outside, looked up at the sky, and thought to myself, so the book is going to be published in English? He's Brazilian. We talked about that, right? At the time, I was struggling to establish myself as a writer and to follow my path, despite all the voices telling me it wasn't possible. And little by little, my dream was becoming reality. 10, 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 copies sold in America. One day, a Brazilian journalist phoned to say that President Clinton had been photographed reading the book. Sometime later, when I was in Turkey, I opened the magazine Vanity Fair, and there was Julia Roberts declaring that she adored the book. Walking alone down a street in Miami, I heard a girl telling her mother, "You must read The Alchemist." The book has been translated into 56 languages, has sold more than 20 million copies, and people are beginning to ask, what's the secret behind such a huge success? The only honest response I have is, I don't know. All I know is that, like Santiago, the shepherd boy, we all have to be aware of our personal calling. What is a personal calling? It is God's blessing. Oh, the man is deeply spiritual and religious, by the way. Side note. It is the path that God chose for you here on earth. Whenever we do something that fills us with enthusiasm, we are following our legend. Kareem, hi, I just saw this. We are starting The Alchemist. I'm reading the introduction, then the prologue, and then a bit from, I guess, part 1. We don't really have chapters in this book. All right. However, we don't all have the courage to confront our own dream. Why? There are 4 obstacles. First, we are told from childhood onward that everything we want to do is impossible. We grow up with this idea, and as the years accumulate, so too do the layers of prejudice, fear, and guilt. There comes a time when our personal calling is so deeply buried in our soul as to be invisible, but it's still there. Oh, a little connection to the A Dream Deferred poem that I read the week before break as a poem of the day. Y'all should check that out. Okay. If we have the courage to dissenter dream, we are then faced by the second obstacle. Love. We know what we want to do, but are afraid of hurting those around us by abandoning everything in order to pursue our dream. We do not realize that love is just a further impetus, not something that will prevent us going forward. We do not realize that those who genuinely wish us well, want us to be happy, and are prepared to accompany us on that journey. Once we have accepted that love is a stimulus, we come up against the third obstacle, fear of the defeats we will meet on the path. We who fight for our dreams suffer far more when it doesn't work out, because we cannot fall back on the old excuse, oh well, I didn't really want it anyway. We do want it, and know that we have staked everything on it, and that the path of the personal calling is no easier than any other path, except that our whole heart is in this journey. Then we warriors of light must be prepared to have patience in difficult times, and to know that the universe is conspiring in our favor, even though we may not understand how. I ask myself, are defeats necessary? Well, necessary or not, they happen. When we first begin fighting for our dream, we have no experience and make many mistakes. The secret of life, though, is to fall 7 times and to get up 8 times. Ooh, love me some grit, yes. So why is it so important to live our personal calling? Hey guys, just a reminder to mute yourself. Sorry. Thank you. So why is it so important to live our personal calling if we are only going to suffer more than other people? Because once we have overcome the defeats, and we always do, we are filled by a greater sense of euphoria and confidence. In the silence of our hearts, we know that we are proving ourselves worthy of the miracle of life. Each day, each hour is part of the good fight. We start to live with enthusiasm and pleasure. Intense, unexpected suffering passes more quickly than suffering that is apparently bearable. The latter goes on for years, and without our noticing, eats away at our soul until one day we are no longer able to free ourselves from the bitterness, and it stays with us for the rest of our lives. Having centered our dream, having used the power of love to nurture it, and spent many years living with the scars, we suddenly notice that what we always wanted is there, waiting for us, perhaps the very next day. Then comes the fourth obstacle. Almost done, in case you were wondering. The fear of realizing the dream for which we fought all our lives. Oscar Wilde, ooh, famous poet, love him. Each man kills the thing he loves. So true. I love plants, and I nearly murdered them because I overwatered them. I love them too much. Back to the book. The mere possibility of getting what we want fills the soul of the ordinary person with guilt. We look around at all those who have failed to get what they want and feel that we do not deserve to get what we want either. We forget about all the obstacles we overcame, all the suffering we endured, all the things we had to give up in order to get this far. I have known a lot of people who, when their personal calling was within their grasp, went on to commit a series of stupid mistakes and never reached their goal when it was only a step away. This is the most dangerous of the obstacles because it has a kind of saintly aura about it, renouncing joy and conquest. But if you believe yourself worthy of the thing you fought so hard to get, then you become an instrument of God. You help the soul of the world, and you understand why you are here. Whoa, that was like very heavy and deeply philosophical. I think in order to summarize, his message and intention setting behind the book, it's if you have a dream, don't let it go. Pursue it to the fullest. You are probably going to fail, and that should be expected. But you're going to come out on the other side stronger. I feel like on some level we've all heard that message before. That was just really articulate. Wow, I can't even say articulate. That was just really well worded. Okay, so onto the prologue, and this is just a page and a half. So I had you do a couple things today. I had you look at a biography of Paulo Coelho. I hope I said his name right. And the next bit, I had you actually look at a Greek myth, and it was about Narcissus. I think I got his name right. Narcissus. So you may have heard, oh, stop being such a narcissist. And that just means, wow, you're like really selfish and maybe into yourself. And the story behind all that relates to what I'm about to read to you today in the prologue. Okay, the prologue. The alchemist picked up a book that someone in the caravan had brought. Leafing through the pages, he found a story about Narcissus. The alchemist knew. Hey, God. Hey, Olivier, could you just mute yourself, please? Thanks, honey. Okay. The alchemist knew the legend of Narcissus, a youth who knelt daily beside a lake to contemplate his own beauty. He was so fascinated by himself that one morning he fell into the lake and drowned. At the spot where he fell, a flower was born, which was called the Narcissus. But this was not how the author of the book ended the story. He said that when the Narcissus died, the goddess of the forest appeared and found the lake, which had been fresh water transformed into a lake of salty tears. Why do you weep? The goddess asked. I weep for Narcissus, the lake replied. It is no surprise that you weep for Narcissus, they said, for though we always pursued him in the forest, you alone could contemplate his beauty close at hand. But was Narcissus beautiful? The lake asked. Who better than you to know that? The goddess said in wonder. After all, it was by your banks that he knelt each day to contemplate himself. The lake was silent for some time. Finally it said, I weep for Narcissus, but I never noticed that Narcissus was beautiful. I weep because each time he knelt beside my banks, I could see in the depths of his eyes my own beauty reflected. What a lovely story, the alchemist thought. Oh, guys, the irony is so rich there. Okay, why would he start in this way? And here is took some notes. So I think that he's bringing up vanity, which means kind of like being obsessed with yourself, because sometimes you have to trust and believe in yourself to realize that you're worth it and that your dreams are worth pursuing. And also, it's a little bit of foreshadowing. It's the alchemist in a caravan, which is like an old school wagon type thing. And so it's foreshadowing that a journey is about to happen. So I think this is like a moment of inspiration for him. Just saying. You feel free to have your own opinions. Okay, part 1 now. How are we doing for time? My God. Okay. The boy's name was Santiago. Santiago, Santiago, Santiago. Dusk was falling as the boy arrived with his herd at an abandoned church. The roof had fallen in long ago, and an enormous sycamore had grown on the spot where the sacristy, I think it's like a sacred temple church thing, had once stood. He decided to spend the night there. He saw to it that all the sheep entered through the ruined gate and then laid some planks across it to prevent the flock from wandering away during the night. There were no wolves in the region, but once an animal had strayed during the night, and the boy had had to spend the entire next day searching for it. He swept the floor with his jacket and lay down, using the book he had just finished reading as a pillow. He told himself that he would have to start reading thicker books. They lasted longer and made more comfortable pillows. Ooh. It was still dark when he woke, and looking up, he could see the stars through the half-destroyed roof. I wanted to sleep a little longer, he thought. He had had the same dream that night as a week ago, and once again he had awakened before it ended. He arose, and taking up his crook, like if you're a shepherd, it's like kind of like a cane, like a walking stick of sorts. Oh God, I lost my place, sorry. Taking up his crook, began to awaken the sheep that still slept. He had noticed that as soon as he awoke, most of his animals had also began to stir. It was as if some mysterious energy bound his life to that of the sheep, with whom he had spent the past 2 years leading them through the countryside in search of food and water. They are so used to me that they know my schedule, he muttered. Thinking about that for a moment, he realized that it could be the other way around, that it was he who had become accustomed to their schedule. But there were certain of them who took a bit longer to awaken. The boy prodded them one by one with his crook, calling each by name. He had always believed the sheep were able to understand what he said, so there were times when he read them parts of his books that had made an impression on him, or when he would tell them of the loneliness or the happiness of a shepherd in the fields. Sometimes he would comment to them on the things he had seen in the villages they'd passed. But for the past few days, he had spoken to them about only one thing: the girl, the daughter of a merchant who lived in the village they would reach in about 4 days. He had been to the village only once the year before. The merchant was the proprietor of a dry goods shop, and he always demanded that the sheep be sheared in his presence so that he would not be cheated. A friend had told the boy about the shop, and he had taken his sheep there. There's a little tiny page break. I need to sell some wool, the boy told the merchant. The shop was busy, and the man asked the shepherd to wait until the afternoon, so the boy sat on the steps of the shop and took a book from his bag. I didn't know shepherds knew how to read, said a girl's voice behind him. The girl was typical of the region of Andalusia, with flowing black hair and eyes that vaguely recalled the Moorish conquerors. Well, usually I learn more from my sheep than from my books, he answered. During the 2 hours that they talked, she told him she was the merchant's daughter, and spoke of life in the village, where each day was like all the others. The shepherd told her of the Andalusian countryside and related the news from the other towns where he had stopped. It was a pleasant change from talking to his sheep. How did you learn to read? The girl asked at one point. Like everybody learns, he said, in school. Well, if you know how to read, why are you just a shepherd? The boy mumbled an answer that allowed him to avoid responding to her question. He was sure the girl would never understand. He went on telling stories about his travels, and her bright Moorish eyes went wide with fear and surprise. As the time passed, the boy found himself wishing that the day would never end, that her father would stay busy and keep him waiting for 3 days. He recognized that he was feeling something he had never experienced before, the desire to live in one place forever. With the girl with the raven hair, his days would never be the same again. Oh gosh, guys, I think our heroes got a little crushed. Ooh. But finally the merchant appeared and asked the boy to shear 4 sheep. He paid for the wool and asked the shepherd to come back the following year. There's another little page break, and then I'm just going to read a bit more and then I'll stop for the day. And now it was only 4 days before he would be back in that same village. He was excited and at the same time uneasy. Maybe the girl had already forgotten him. Lots of shepherds passed through selling their wool. Doesn't matter, he said to his sheep. I know other girls in other places. But in his heart, he knew that it did matter. And he knew that shepherds, like seamen and like traveling salesmen, always found a town where there was someone who could make them forget the joys of carefree wandering. The day was dawning, and the shepherd urged his sheep in the direction of the sun. They never have to make any decisions, he thought. Maybe that's why they always stay close to me. The only things that concerned the sheep were food and water. As long as the boy knew how to find the best pastures in Andalasia, they would be his friends. Yes, their days were all the same, with the seemingly endless hours between sunrise and dusk, and they had never read a book in their young lives and didn't understand when the boy told them about the sights of the cities. They were content with just food and water, and in exchange, they generously gave of their wool, their company, and, once in a while, their meat. If I became a monster today and decided to kill them one by one, they would become aware only after most of the flock had been slaughtered, thought the boy. They trust me, and they've forgotten how to rely on their own instincts, because I lead them to nourishment. The boy was surprised at his thoughts. I think he's surprised here because he realizes that he has power over the sheep, and that they obey him. Okay. Maybe the church with the sycamore growing from within had been haunted. It had caused him to have the same dream for a second time, and it was causing him to feel anger toward his faithful companions. He drank a bit from the wine. How old is this kid? That remained from his dinner of the night before, and he gathered his jacket closer to his body. He knew that a few hours from now, with the sun at its zenith, the heat would be so great that he would not be able to lead his flock across the fields. It was the time of day when all of Spain slept during the summer. The heat lasted until nightfall, and all that time he had to carry his jacket. But when he thought to complain about the burden of its weight, he remembered that because he had the jacket, he had withstood the cold of the dawn. We have to be prepared for change, he thought, and he was grateful for the jacket's weight and warmth. The jacket had a purpose, and so did the boy. His purpose in life was to travel, and after 2 years of walking the Andalasian terrain, he knew all the cities of the region. He was planning on this visit to explain to the girl how it was that a simple shepherd knew how to read, that he had attended a seminary until he was 16. Oh, he's older, thank goodness. His parents had wanted him to become a priest, and thereby a source of pride for a simple farm family. They worked hard just to have food and water like the sheep. He had studied Latin, Spanish, and theology. Theology is like a fancy word for religious studies. But ever since he had been a child, he had wanted to know the world, and this was much more important to him than knowing God and learning about man's sins. One afternoon on a visit to his family, he had summoned up the courage to tell his father that he didn't want to become a priest, that he wanted to travel. There's a page break down at the bottom of page 8, and that's actually where I'm going to stop today. So, our shepherd boy, he finally had the courage to speak up for what he wanted, and he told his parents, sorry, priesthood is not for me. I need to travel. I want to travel. That is the calling that I feel inherently inside of me. You go, dude. All right, let's check the time. It is 1:24. Oh my gosh, I'm 1 minute ahead of schedule. All right, let me pause this. If you guys could just stay on, and I'll quickly go down the list and just quickly check in about argumentative prompts. That would be awesome. If I've already checked in with you, go ahead and sign right off. All right, stop recording.